Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Abby Goldstein, and I am from St. Louis and a member of Jewish Federation's Ukraine Response Task Force. I have had the life-changing privilege of visiting Ukraine twice since the war broke out. The first was on an emergency fly-in in March of 2022, so 1 month after the war had broken out. And the second was last August of 2023 with JFNA's Ukraine Task Force. And it was truly life-changing. Evan gave me a script, but I just want to tell you, these people were so incredibly and profoundly grateful that we were there, and they thanked us nonstop for not forgetting about them. So after my first trip, one thing I wrote was that while we don't know when or how this war will end, we do know that this crisis is far from over. In fact, it's just the beginning. It could take a generation for the Ukrainian people to fully recover, and this is our responsibility to help them. And tragically, here we are, 2 years and 9 months later, and there's no end in sight. So that's why it's so important that we're here having this conversation. We are so lucky to have amazing panelists that will be in conversation that is moderated by the amazing David Heller, who's the National Campaign Chair and the Chair of Jewish Federation's Ukraine Response Task Force. So thank you for being here, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, David.
So that is really the amazing Abby Goldstein, and it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, and thank you all for coming to this really incredibly important session. We've got a great lineup. As Abby said, part of the reason that I'm up here, again, National Campaign Chair, but because I took the time to go to Ukraine, I took the time to go to Poland on the border, same as Abby, first weeks of the war, and to see the movement of people. You're going to hear a little bit about that today. Also to go into Lvov with many of our panelists here tonight, and then to go this past summer into Kyiv and experience that as well. And I think the ability to go into the country and to speak to the people and to see the relief workers that are there, it's just life-changing experience. It's incredibly important work. Your showing up today to this panel is incredibly important work. And as I look around, as I've said hello to a lot of people in the room, the number of people in this room that have a Ukrainian background is really special. And so thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for listening, and you guys are the best advocates out there in your communities to be out there talking about this. So it's really, really important. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, the Jewish Federations launched a historic campaign, and we raised just about $100 million to provide life-saving relief to our brothers and sisters over there. And that was really, really important. It was 146 federations, and now I'm going back pre-October 7th. Remember, this is 2022, and the way that the communities galvanized. I've got some of my other fellow travelers that just walked into the room, our JDC chair, and it's the way that the 146 federations, both in the United States and Canada, stood up to raise that $100 million was really, really important, but it wasn't enough. And so we got that money out into the system. We worked with some new partners in new ways. And I think to me that was one of the most important things, was watching. I remember walking on that first trip when and going with JDC and Jewish Agency, and the collaboration that was going on was something for me as a volunteer, and watching that was truly special. And then as time went on and really understanding the conflict and how critically important Chabad was in that role, and Ort and all the different players, and of course it was Jonathan, JCC and Krakow and what's happening there. I mean, it was just that working together was so incredible, the way that everyone partnered, and they all had their expertise. So, one was dealing with people coming across the border, and others were dealing with people in the country, others were dealing with Aliyah, some were dealing with Holocaust survivors and the elderly, others were dealing with what's going on with the way Chabad knows and understands the communities. It was really, really unbelievable the way that everyone worked together to make that happen. And, now we're 33 months later, and the conflict's still going on, and we are people are in desperate need. And the people that are there, and this war continues, and it's on page 8 or 9 of the New York Times, if at all. And so how do we get the news out there? How do we get the stories of what's happening in this conflict? And if it's in the stories, it's not about the people anymore and what's happening. It's all at this master geopolitical level that's happening of like, should we be, involved, and shouldn't we be involved? And the answer is, we don't get involved in that. We get involved in the fact of helping people on the ground. And that's the work that we do, and that's what you're going to hear about today. But before we bring up the panel, we have Melinda Herring, who is a senior advisor for Razam for Ukraine, and she is an expert on the global situation. She's on the political side. She brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. Her full bio is in your app, but I think we're going to all learn a real lot. And so, Melinda, I'd love for you to come up here and educate us before we have our panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for caring. And thank you for caring in spite of what's happening in your community. I think it says a lot about who you guys are as a community, that you're still so engaged in Ukraine. The Federation has been so generous, and it's really, really impressive. I am lucky enough to work for Razam for Ukraine, and it means together in Ukrainian. How many people here have family links in Ukraine? Can I see hands? Wow. Okay. How many people have been to Ukraine? Fabulous. Okay. We need you to keep coming. That's the message I want to leave you with here today. There is great need. This winter we're entering the third war of winter in Ukraine, and it's going to be the hardest. The grid, this is not a very sexy topic, but the power grid is really, really weak. And if Vladimir Putin continues his strikes on innocent people, it's going to be the worst yet. Energy experts say that the power grid could go out for 4 to 18 hours, depending on where people are. This summer, I spent the summer at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv and studying Ukrainian, and I studied by candlelight because the power would go on and off. You'd be in the middle of paying for your dinner, and the Visa card machine wouldn't work. It's a completely utterly weird way to live. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about Razam, and then David has assigned me to do 3 things. So Razam started 10 years ago when the Euromaidan, the revolution of dignity, happened, and Ukrainians said, we want to live a different way. And they went to the street and they demanded justice. And we're based out in New York City, and we're mostly Ukrainians and Ukrainian Americans and a few gringos. I'm married to a Ukrainian Jew, and that's how I got into this. And I moved to Kiev in 2007 and was an English language teacher and was going to be there for 6 months and fell in love with the country. And I have to warn you, if those of you who haven't been to Ukraine, once you go, you will never get over it. It's a great place. So Razam has raised $100 million since the full-scale war started. We mostly do humanitarian work, and this is a sample of one of the things that we give. This is a medic backpack, and we've given thousands of these away. And it's interesting not because it has gauze and a tourniquet in it. It's interesting because it's made in Ukraine. So the economy is not doing great there. So every dollar we can put back into the Ukrainian economy, we do that. And we would love and invite you warmly to visit our warehouse. We have a distribution warehouse in Kiev and in Lviv. And I have to tell you, talking to the drivers who are about my age, and these are just normal guys, and they drive unarmed vehicles to the front all the time. And I said, what's it like? And they said, quiet. And I said, what's the soundtrack? Metallica? And they said, silence. And to meet these people and the kind of courage that they portray every day is really, really inspiring. Rozum is lucky to be advised by a board of trustees, and Arnie Filko, who was involved with the Federation for many years down in New Orleans, is one of our prize members. So I just want to say, give Arnie a shout out. So David has asked me to give you, to talk about 3 buckets. Number 1 is the current political situation in Ukraine. Not good, unsteady. There you go. I'll say a bit more in a minute. The pressures facing Ukraine inside the country and its uncertainty, and they're mostly psychological. And then he wants me to pull out my crystal ball and tell you what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months. So here we go. On the current political situation, Donald Trump obviously is the new president, and he has said that he will bring peace to this region in 24 hours. He said that he's going to zero out assistance to Ukraine. He said a lot of really irresponsible things. His son today said, Volodymyr Zelensky, you have 38 days until your allowance ends. The people that he's considering in high cabinet level positions, I can't find an internationalist among them. I wish I could. Pompeo's out, Nikki Haley's out. The only good thing I can say, there's 2 good things I can say. One is that Trump talked about a just peace. So he seems to understand that justice is an issue. The second good thing I can say is you can count on it. Take it to the bank. Putin always overplays his hand. I think there's a pretty good shot that Putin is going to offend Trump and that he's going to overplay his hand. So honestly, we have to wait and see. I wish I could say something more profound than that. So the war is going into a 3rd winter, and we expect it to be the hardest yet. You'll hear from great Jewish humanitarian organizations that can give you a bird's eye view of many of the cities and the kinds of needs that people are experiencing. The one piece that I would advise you to keep your eye on is the Russians and the Ukrainians have talked about putting an agreement in place that would halt the infrastructure strikes. That would be a huge blessing if we could get that kind of agreement in place. It may or may not be put in place, but that's something to watch. One of the pieces that I worry about, you turn on the TV, you look at the damage that's been done in Ukraine, and you see a lot of destroyed buildings. And that's tragic, but this is about human lives. This is about senior citizens who are left. I went to the front line. I am not courageous, and I have a little daughter, so I don't like to live dangerously, but I went to the front because I'm friends with Bernard-Henri Lévy, and he said, part of our job as people of conscience is to witness, is to bear witness. So last year I bore witness, and I strapped on body armor and a helmet, and I went out to Zaporizhia Oblast, which is on the front, and I went to Arikiv, and I wanted to see how people live who are left behind. And what I saw is horrifying, and I'll show you pictures afterwards if you want to see it, but old people in their 70s and 80s are living in basements. They have no toilet, they have no running water, and they have gone into what are shelters. They've taken their blankets. They have a kettle so they can make hot tea during the winter. They have their fuzzy blankets, and they don't have a light. And they're just waiting. They're just waiting and waiting for peace. And this is the reality along the front. But the thing that I worry about are many children. 1 million Ukrainian children rely on computers like these to do their schooling. And it's great that they have online schools. It's fabulous. But guys, let's be real. We had COVID, and now we've had 3 years of war. So economists say that this is going to affect Ukrainian children's earnings. And they say that it may set these children back 20% in terms of their lifelong earnings. It's definitely set them back academically. That's one of the things I worry about. There's a fantastic organization called SAVED, S-A-V-E-D. It's working across the country. It's run by Anna Novosad, former education minister, and they're building the best shelters so that kids can go back to school. You have to have a shelter in order to reopen. And they're also building centers where kids can get together and socialize and play games and do all the things that we take for granted every day. Okay, what about the pressures facing Ukraine inside the country? So there's no end to the war and the attendant stresses. There's uncertainty. And if you haven't been to Ukraine, I strongly recommend that you go. It's hard to explain it. Maybe if you've lived in Israel during the war, you get it instantly. But let me try to put it in human terms. One of my coworkers' names is Ava, and she has a little girl. And she said, before the war, I would take my little girl and we'd have a slumber party. And I would ask all the moms, does she have a nut allergy? She said, now, before we can have a slumber party, every mom wants to know, what is your air raid plan? What is your air raid plan? This is the reality of life now. Active duty soldiers have no end of service. This also is a big psychological factor that plays into everyday life. Family separation is also a reality. Divorce is rampant as well. PTSD is out of control. At least 10 of 40 million people, this is a very low estimate, have PTSD. Anxiety is a big issue as well. 80,000 people need prosthetics. If you're going to Ukraine, I urge you to stop in Lviv and stop at the Superhuman Center. This is one of the best places that I go during the war. It's based on Jewish values. It's a hospital for people who lose their limbs. And it was started by two good Jewish boys in Odessa. And they said, we have to do more. So Howard Buffett gave them $16 million, and they opened a hospital in less than a year. And they've helped hundreds of people. They're bringing in the best prosthetics, and they're now doing facial reconstruction surgery. So if you get a chance, please stop by the Superhuman Center. They're bringing people back to life. And the economy is tough. It's hard to maintain a business during blackouts, obviously. Now, with the winter, if heat and power go down in major cities, we could see up to 2 million people, 2 million refugees leave Europe. That's a worst case scenario. Most people don't think it'll be that bad. My organization, Razom for Ukraine, is mostly a humanitarian organization. We have a section called Razom Relief, and it's small grants, and we give to Ukrainian organizations because we believe Ukrainian organizations know local needs, and they can move money faster to need. So over the last 2.5 years, we give about $3 million away. These organizations are on the ground, they're providing help, and they're monitoring needs. So what we're hearing now is that fuel, firewood, and shelter for IDPs are going to be huge issues. People will be moving, especially people who are very close to the front. We're worried in particular about shelter in Kharkiv and Dnipro regions. We know that more people will be moving and need help, and that resources are limited. In particular, there's 12,000 people that are in Pokrovsk. You'll see that on the news. And it's one of the cities that's under a lot of shelter, or under a lot of bombing. People need cooking equipment, and we see people already getting equipment together to feed others. Ukrainians are really good at self-organizing. They're fantastic at it. And people know that the winter is going to be hard. Ukrainians are endlessly innovative. Someone else already said that. You stole my talking point. And they're starting to work with solar panels to try to mitigate some of the damages of the strikes as well. People with limited mobility, I know this community is fantastic with it. Don't forget them. It's going to be very, very hard for elderly people and IDPs. And there's a limited amount of resources for people who can evacuate them and then take care of them. Okay, crystal ball time, David. So what to expect? The honest answer, I'm almost done, is I don't know. You know, a lot of it depends on Trump and his team, and we simply don't know who he's going to appoint. I am hopeful and watching for an agreement between Russia and the Ukrainians on infrastructure strikes, and that would be a huge blessing for ordinary people. My big prediction is that it's a hard winter. Ukrainians will come through it, and then I think there will probably be one big more military push in the spring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was... It's on? Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So informative and really amazing for you to take us through this, because not everybody has been to Ukraine and not everybody is fully engaged in understanding it. And the way that you just laid that out, I think, is unbelievable for all of us to understand. We're going to have a panel discussion right now, so I'd love for my panelists to come up here.
there stairs?
There are stairs on that side.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's the runner, that's why he jumped right up.
I don't want to treat people to the visual of me not going up the stairs. Dance.
So when Melinda was talking about going to Ukraine and that all of you should get an opportunity to go there and witness it yourselves because it's incredibly important. It is not for the faint of heart. It's absolutely a beautiful country. Like I was astounded at how incredibly beautiful it was. But I had the opportunity this summer when I went to Kyiv to go with Ariel Zwang, who is at my right here. She is the head of the JDC, the American Joint Distribution Committee, and we had a 13-hour train ride, and it is just incredible. And I just the work that the JDC is doing there is just is truly incredible. And Yehuda Sutton was on that trip as well. Yehuda is the new Director General of the Jewish Agency, and the Jewish Agency is working on so many things, but one of the things that's incredibly important in a role that they've played in Ukraine is the whole issue of Aliyah and Jewish life in Jewish experience in Ukraine. Last summer when I was in Lvov, we got to visit some of the summer camps that your team is working on, and to see how Jewish life continues in Ukraine is really fascinating. You think, as this American mind, you think, how could life go on? And it does. And it does because of a lot of work that you do. And then we have Rabbi David Eliezeri, who I had the opportunity to travel twice with to Ukraine. And just the work that Chabad, I never really had an understanding of the infrastructure of, David, is it 22 Chabads?
35.
35 Chabads that are working in Ukraine, and the way that they understand the community. And so when Ariel's team would have an elderly person that would come over the border in the first couple of days after the war, and they were not able to even grab their passports or their papers, and they end up in Poland, between the coordination of the JDC and Chabad, they are able to get the papers and to work on it and to get them so that Yehuda's team could get them to make Aliyah to Israel. And in that way station, you had Jonathan Ornstein, who runs the JCC in Krakow, and these people were just streaming through Krakow over the past 33 months, and it's just amazing to see the work that his team and how they have worked on getting these people settled. So we're going to have a conversation today, and I want to start with Ariel and ask you. I'm sorry, I'm going to start with Yehuda.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
I want to hear what you would have to say too.
And Yehuda, what I'd love to hear from you is an example of the shifting issues that are going on right now, and how your team is tracking and adjusting for them as we creep into the fourth year.
So let me start and say that, Harry Truman said that you can achieve everything if you don't care who get credit. And I think that what you witnessed in 2022 and beyond is the kind of work between organizations that understand that the time is now and we need to be there. And from that moment, I think that the kind of collaboration and trust that is building is unbelievable. For us, there are three main issues. One is that you have a decline in the personal sense of security for your team. Put aside the people, your team, to get out of their home, to come to work. They don't know when the siren will be there, and they need to feel that they are not alone. They need to feel that there are people around them and someone is watching after them. So all the issue of security and resilience of the team is one. Number two, for us, is that we have, I would say, divided families in Ukraine. 200,000 people, maybe Chabad will say more, but 200,000 Jews in Ukraine, 50,000 of them left Ukraine. That means that you have a broken families. We see that in Israel. We see that with the people that have been in Israel. Part of their family have to stay over there. And then what is the kind of support you give those family, that there's kind of a waiting situation until they can be reunited again. And I think it sent us to a whole different way of working for them. And the last piece for us is how do you create hope when it's a prolonged war? It's not only about the immediate needs that have been done by those organizations, it's about what needs to be done in order to create the hope for the people that there is a brighter future over there. You spoke about the summer camps and the whole education system, how the young people that made a decision to stay have a safe place to really imagine and dream and be part of that. So all of these changes send us to really create a new infrastructure in Ukraine.
Great, thank you. And Ariel, your team has been there. You know, it says here that you've been operating in Ukraine for 30 years, but that's really not true. You've been operating for over 100 years in that region. I mean, this is the work that you do, but since the Iron Curtain fell 30 years ago, your team has been intensely involved in Ukraine and setting up an infrastructure and working with the Holocaust funds and making sure that elderly and families have an enriched Jewish life. And then February 24th, 2022 happens, and your team is there and able to respond. And as Yehuda said about hope and having hope for Jewish Ukrainians, what are some of the tools that the JDC is using to help with anxiety and resilience and strength to be able to carry on at this time?
David, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you also for touching on the history. I'd just like to give a little bit of background very briefly so that people have a sense of the scope of our work and what it's based on. I also want to say it really isn't a coincidence that JFNA, JDC, Jewish Agency, Chabad, I'm sorry you weren't on that trip, but the four of us all traveled together. And those are very important experiences to have a shared understanding of the situation and each organization's role in responding. JDC, for the last 30 years, since the Iron Curtain fell, has been providing humanitarian aid to the poorest Jews in the world. In Ukraine, 35,000 Jews out of those 200,000, or let's say 150,000 who are still there. Russia, out of Russia, 600,000 Jews, also 35,000 Jews. And to all the things that you were speaking about, we deliver food, fuel, companionship. We even give people cell phones and grandchildren to help them use the cell phones, to keep them connected to each other and to Jewish community. And we do this, again, at great scale, tens of thousands of people. And it's on that human service delivery apparatus that we, of course, based our entire response as a result of the full-scale invasion. Yehuda, you talked about some of the emerging needs, basic needs for food and fuel, warmth and electricity. Those will continue. But then there are needs that evolve because this grinding misery has lasted so far so long. Now, if you talk to my colleagues who come from Ukraine, they'll tell you, trauma is not a big word for us. We don't say, I have trauma. I'm telling you what people say. I have trauma. Let me go see the therapist for my trauma. In other words, things that we're very used to in the United States and in Israel, very normal to seek therapy if you're experiencing anxiety or distress. That's not the case there. And yet, the estimate is that a third of the Ukrainian population, just as we know half of the Israeli population, in fact needs mental health support. So JDC has opened 8 trauma centers. They are counseling centers as anyone would recognize from the Jewish Family Services in your community. Group rooms, individual rooms, big chairs and tables, little chairs and tables for the kids. And we provide evidence-based treatments that help people deal with their symptoms. So that is something that has emerged since the beginning and is crucial for the ability of society to continue to function. The other thing that I would just touch on is that a lot of what we talk about is providing people with when their lives are in peril, our impulse is to provide the direct life-saving support. But that's not living. That's not enough for living. And for living, you need meaning. For our Jewish community, it means providing Jewish life, Jewish community. Again, as my colleagues in Ukraine say, here in Ukraine too, every Friday night, Shabbat rolls around, and we can find people at our chesed organizations and in our communities, lighting candles, attending services, young people celebrating Shabbat together. And at Camp Sarvaj, our flagship program in Hungary, which is a major engine for our identity formation for European and FSU young people, we also provide winter respite. Our board, it was a dump, Sarvaj, like any summer camp. I went to a summer camp that's a dump too, it's great. However, it was this beautiful facility, but it wasn't winterized. It couldn't be used year round. Our board renovated it, winterized it. They didn't know that to survive a bitter winter, hundreds of families would need to come there for respite, but that's what they do.
Amazing work the JDC does. And Chabad is an incredible partner in this effort because, as I mentioned, the Chabad network that has grown there over the past 30 plus years is on the ground. They know every family in those communities. And David, the work, that's one of the things I've been most blown away with on my trips is to see the work that Chabad is doing. And can you talk a little bit from that sort of eye-level view of what's happening with Chabad?
First, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here with the whole group, because it was 100 years ago that the JDC began working with us in Russia, and I'm also on the board of the Jewish Agency. We couldn't have a better guy who just became the head of the Jewish Agency. And Jacob here, we went through wars together, and he stood up for Judaism in Krakow in a very special way. It's not we're there 35 years. We're there 200 years. And when communism came in, we went underground. And when communism left, we came out of the closet, but in a special spiritual way. So, and when
that has been recorded.
I have to carry. So I'm from California. Anyway, but seriously speaking, we began to send shluchim back. From the first shluchim that went, the first emissaries of Chabad that went was to Kharkov and to Dnieper, which was the very beginning. Dnieper, these are the cities that we grew from. The Rebbe was brought up, Lubavitcher Rebbe was brought up in Dnieper. The founder of Chabad is buried in Ukraine. So this was like a return home. We came back to home turf, which was a very, very important thing. The second thing is that the rabbis and rebbitzins who came are staying there for life. And as you know, many of you know rabbis and rebbitzins, Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins in your community. They don't seem to move around too much. These people are here for life. And I'm going to talk about one town, so to speak, to give an understanding from the macro to the micro, which is Zaporizhzhia, which is a city, I'm pronouncing it right, about 50 miles south of Dnieper. It's 20 miles from the border. It's being shelled every single day. And in 1996, the Rabbi Nochem and Dina Ehrentraub came to town. It was a small Jewish community. The JDC had a presence in town, and still Baruch Hashem has a presence that works very well together with Chabad in town, and basically built the basic communal infrastructure in that city, which is a school, a shul, a mikveh, they rebuilt the synagogue, and I wanted to show the video, but it's not going to work today, of a beautiful Torah dedication they just had 2-3 weeks ago. Like 1,000 Jews are walking down the street in the city. It's just an amazing moment. What happened here because of the war was all of these rabbis and rebbitzins could have left. We have today 150 couples. That's 300 Chabad shluchim. That's on support staff, which is about 1,000 people. We have 35 schools, we have 35 camps, we have synagogues, we have community centers. It's basic communal infrastructure. And when they could have left and gone back to Israel or to America or to England, wherever they came from, they stayed. And this for the communities, everybody knows that this rabbi and rebbitzin, Nochem and Dina, the rabbi and rebbitzin in this town, could have left, but they stayed. And this caused a revolution in the whole community because everybody understood that they are there for them 24/7. Whatever they need, they become the mothers and the fathers of the people going through these terrible, tragic times. So we are seeing this on the level, and we're seeing terrible problems. For instance, as it was mentioned earlier, the electricity, it goes out everywhere. Thank God the Jewish buildings in town, the synagogues, the schools, etc., because of JF&A, have generators. So when the lights go out in town, there's a place somebody can come to charge their phone. And there is, and what's happened also is that the connection between the people, the Jews in this town, has become so much stronger. They've become so much more bonded. Now, a lot of people have left. In this city, 2,000 people have gone to Europe, 1,000 people have gone to Israel, but many cannot leave because if you're between 20 and 60, they're going to draft you. And many men today are afraid to go on the streets because because what happens is they'll pick you up and they'll take you away. The guy who's the gabbai in the shul, like run the synagogue, they grabbed him, they took him into basic training, he almost shot the officer. They said, you belong back in the synagogue. But the fact of the matter is, it strengthened the Jewish community in a remarkable way. So when you have a rabbi and you have a rebbitzin with their children, and they're there, and they're not leaving, and they're there for you no matter what. This is not a job, this is their lives. And they're not what's his naming. They're going to be there no matter what. And for us, when I grew up in yeshiva, my teachers were all people, they would say, you were only in Siberia because they were part of the Chabad underground in Russia that kept Jewish schools alive in Russia. And so everybody went to Siberia for a while. Oh, you only went 2 years. I went for 10. That's real serious. Our role models were all these Jews who put their lives in the line for Judaism. We never thought that we would have to put our lives on the line again. But because of that, the strength of Jewish community life, but those who have stayed, is more vibrant and more dynamic, and it's in the connection of one Jew to another. And the self-sacrifice, I think of my life in California, I might have to drive an hour for kosher pizza. These people, what they are doing for the Jewish people, they are true soldiers of self-sacrifice, and on the ground, connecting to the people and connecting to the community and keeping Jewish life afloat and alive with the help of many wonderful partners. And we'd be very happy if Yehuda took all of them to Israel, but I don't know if that's going to work out so easily. It may not happen. And the JDC doing also very important work in the area of Chesed and the important projects that they do, that together, what's happening here is despite this terrible adversity and this war, grinding on. And when I spoke to the rabbi this morning, he says, they just finished the shelling. This is what they're living through. We're comfortable in a hotel in Washington, D.C., and the shelling is falling on this town and the Jewish community.
Rabbi, thank you very much. Jonathan, a lot of people have asked me, why do I keep going back to Ukraine? What's the appeal? Why am I there? And why did I go with my wife Becky, who's here today? Why did we go in March of 22 right to the border? Well, when my grandfather came from Ukraine in 1922 and take that same path, walking out of the country, they didn't have buses back then, so he walked on foot up north and took a boat to America. And I was watching on that day in March of 2022 these families streaming across the border, and I couldn't help but think, this could have been me and my family, but for the decision that my grandparents made 100 years earlier. Jonathan, you're dealing with stories like that every single day. In Krakow, for 33 months now, you've seen a steady flow of people coming across the border. Can you talk to us a little bit about the whole experience of the displaced person, the whole experience of either as passing through your community or staying put in your community, and what type of hope and future do you see for these families in Ukraine?
Absolutely. So I think you touched on the reasons that we've gotten as involved as we have. We're a small Jewish community center in Krakow, a local Jewish community center with a lot of visitors, but trying to rebuild Jewish life in a post-Holocaust, post-communist society. And when the war started 33 months ago, we made a decision. We're about 2.5 hours from the border, and we decided that we're going to do all we can to help everybody, Jews and non-Jews alike. And if you think about, we're talking very much post-October 7th about the Holocaust. Well, the reason the Holocaust did such damage to the Jewish people is because when the Jews were being singled out, the world stood silent. And I think we would all agree that that gives us a particular responsibility to try to stand up and prevent that from happening to others. So we made this decision early on in the war. We didn't know, the first day of the war, we didn't understand what that would mean. We just started helping. That started to grow. We through partners, amazing partners like JFNA that believe that everybody should be helped. We were so far have been able to directly support 370,000 Ukrainian refugees, 98% of whom are not Jewish. And we are trying to give the support that our families, our relatives did not get 80 years ago. And we feel very privileged to be in that position especially for a community like ours that was almost completely decimated in the Holocaust, that we've now in many ways come full circle. A community that was almost completely destroyed is now not only being reborn, but is able to provide life-changing and life-giving support to so many refugees. And we continue, the numbers are down. We only now, in a city of 800,000 in Krakow, we only have 100,000 refugees in Krakow, down from over 200,000. And we continue to help between 300 and 400 women and children a day. But the story is a Jewish story and a non-Jewish story, and I'm happy to be able to talk about both. From a Jewish perspective, there's a family that is, I think, really symbolizes what we've been able to do. They came, I think they were going to put a photo. There we go, possibly. Oh, the Lasna. These are the Lasna family. There we go. So the mother, Nastya, came with her daughter at the early days of the war, an amazing story. They escaped through all these different countries, and they had heard that she had a friend who'd once visited Krakow and heard it was nice. Some crazy reason came to Krakow, found her way into the JCC. Her daughter right away, the first day, came into our preschool. We have just a plug for the preschool, the first Jewish preschool in Krakow to open since the Holocaust, where her daughter was a student. Finally, she convinced her parents, who didn't want to come out in the beginning. They thought it would blow over in a few days. Obviously not the best prognosticators of the end of the war. Came out a few months later. Nastya started to volunteer helping other refugees. The parents also came and became volunteers in our food food pantry, which opened on the second day of the war and has never closed, which means Shabbat, Yom Kippur, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, never closed. And also recently, the husband came out. He was able to come out as well because he had a medical condition. So you have 5 people all connected, 3 generations all being supported by our JCC. But why do I mention this story? I think it's particularly interesting. She has Armenian roots as well. So if you're a Ukrainian, Jewish, Armenian, you, in a certain sense, have survived. Your family has been involved in 3 genocides so far. And she said to me one day, as she was volunteering in our food pantry, that, well, I never thought of that. You don't really think about these things, but with the famine, the Holocaust, the Holocaust, and the Armenian genocide, she said, it tells me about that her family was part of these 3 genocides, unfortunately. And she said, but I'm proud that every day we're working here to prevent a 4th. So I think it's incredibly important for us as Jews to do all we can to support our Jewish brothers and sisters in Ukraine, but to remember that we owe it to our murdered ancestors to try to provide the support that they didn't get. Thank you.
Jonathan, when you're walking to the border on the second week of the war, and I know you were there, and you're taking a bus to the border, and then they let you off about a couple hundred feet from the border, and you have to walk the rest of the way to the border. And so you're walking towards the border, and all these people are coming the other direction. And it's mothers and children with one suitcase, with a very stoic look on their face of the unknown and what's happening. And you get right up to the border fence, and the very first thing you see at the border fence is an Israeli flag. Mm-hmm. And so the juxtaposition of the Holocaust to what was happening on the weeks after, and seeing how the Jewish community responded. Tell us a little bit about how, and I know you were helping Jews and non-Jews, because one of the things that I think is important is it was, are you human? We will help you. It wasn't, are you Jewish? And that was the same for everyone along this line. But Jonathan, tell us about how the Polish people have embraced the Jewish people and the Jewish story, and how that is so different.
I think it's remarkable to say, when most of us, if we close our eyes and think about Poland, we think of death and tragedy and the Holocaust. In many ways, tragedy is defined by Poland. And yet, 80 years later, which is a long time, but yet really a very short time, it's within living memory, Poland has become one of the safest, easiest places to be Jewish in the world. And what does that say about our people, that within living memory we can come full circle in this way? Now, why is that? Why is that the case? It's because today Polish non-Jews, which is almost everybody in Poland, really embrace Jews and embrace Judaism. This idea that a people that was a minority, such a large minority for 1,000 years, was almost completely decimated, and then nobody spoke really for 45 years during communism about what had happened to the Jews. And since 1989, this tremendous rebirth is underway, and it's only possible. Two things are happening, really. People are finding out they're Jewish. My wife herself grew up without knowing she was Jewish and found out, and we met at the JCC, and our daughter goes to that preschool, so we keep it all in the building. Finding out you're Jewish is one thing, but it's really acting upon it, I think. When David spoke about coming out of the closet, this is what's happening in Poland today. I mean, think about it. You find out that you have... Sorry to bring that up. You find out about having Jewish roots. You can act upon it or not act upon it. And these people are acting upon it in tremendous numbers. We have 1,000 Jewish members at our JCC in a community that the world thinks there are 100 Jews there. But the reason that we're having this success is primarily because of non-Jewish interest in everything Jewish. In a place that's seen so much Jewish tragedy, non-Jews are creating the atmosphere that allows us to thrive, which is something just remarkable today, especially, and that's pre-October 7th and post-October 7th. It continues.
David, Melinda mentioned in her remarks that if there is not a bomb shelter in a school, you can't go to school. That's the state law. And so if you have a bomb shelter that is large enough for a third of the students of the school, then the school has to go to school in thirds. So it's a rolling cycle of the students. When David and Ariel and Yehuda and I were in Kyiv this summer, we got to see a school that was an Ort school run by Chabad, where they excavated with your dollars, they excavated under the building, large enough space for the entire school to go to school. Shows the importance of education. So, and as David mentioned in his opening remarks, they have a generator provided by you, JFNA, to make sure that not only when there's a brownout or a blackout, that they can continue the education. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? And I know that one case, maybe other cases of the work that we're doing together to keep that going.
What's happening? It's really happening all over the country. We were in Kyiv, and the joke was we put the sign on the generator sponsored by JFNA an hour before they arrived, like in the Exodus story, but that wasn't true. I was in Uzhgorod the year before, and I saw the sign on the side, and nobody went to Uzhgorod except me. Uzhgorod is on western Ukraine. What's happening is, how do you keep regular Jewish community functioning, and how do you keep Judaism alive, and how do you help the people to connect? One of the things that struck me about that school we went to in Kyiv, we were surrounded by these very tall, kind of Soviet, apartment buildings that were like 20 stories high and went on for a block and a half. And they told us that when the lights go out, the only place that has light is the synagogue and the Jewish school in the middle of all of it. The non-Jewish public school does not have a generator. The Jewish schools have generators that were sponsored by JFNA. And what it symbolized to me was something much more important, that here in the middle of this darkness and the shelling and the dark moments of people's lives, there's a place of light. There's a light on a physical level, which is the light which is coming out of the building and the bomb shelter, but there's a light on a spiritual level also. That people know that this is a place that they can come to, a place of haven, a place of connection, a place of community, and that somebody is there caring, and that person, that rabbi and rabbi said, they are not leaving, they're staying. They're staying. We actually started the war with 190 couples, and we have now 150. 1 or 2 new couples came. But some people had to leave because it just wasn't, in Kharkov, you just don't need 3 teachers anymore. Things have changed. But it's that beacon of light and that place that is particularly in the Jewish community know. And also there's been much help to people beyond the Jewish community in areas of humanitarian aid. We've spent something upwards to $25 million ourselves, and the Joint has spent much more money than we have, and the Jewish Agency have all spent a tremendous investment here, which is a remarkable statement here about us, about the idea of Kol Yisrael Arei B'Zeh Lezeh, that every Jew is responsible for another. Now, of course, the needs of Ukraine have been eclipsed by the terrible crisis which is going on in Israel, which is to us right now central to all of us. We all know what's going on. There's shelling every day. There's war on multi-fronts, and we're in a very, very terrible situation. But we need to remember that we have our fellow Jews in Ukraine. And right now, Inflation is up by 200%. A lot of people are not working. People are off in the army for months upon end, and they don't see their own families. And with all due respect, there's a sense that a lot of the soldiers are cannon fodder. They schlep you in the army off the street, and you got 30 days of training, and they put you in the front lines. In the American army or the Israeli army, you go for 6 months, 8 months of training before they send you off to battle. There's a weariness in the country, which is absolutely tremendous. But all throughout Ukraine, there is Jewish buildings filled with light, a physical light and a spiritual light, and that's giving sustenance to the future and the survivability of the Jewish people.
So Yehuda, you have teams of people on the ground in Ukraine that are working with families, with youth, and teaching them about being Jewish and teaching them about the spirit of Israel. And we got to witness one of those where we were sitting in a room just like this in a hotel and talking to those young people that work with those families. And then later in the evening, they said, we're going to have some people that are interested in learning about making Aliyah or potentially making Aliyah. And so I thought that's great. We're going to be in a room like this, and there's going to be 6 people that are going to come into the room, and they're going to learn about Aliyah. Well, 120 people come into this room. It's packed. You can't get a chair, and that's what's happening in Ukraine. And can you talk a little bit about?
And yesterday we have 700 people on Aliyah parade in Kiev. But before, and maybe something about Poland, because it's important. All of the organization had been prepared for the kind of the war. Nobody really understand what could happen, because in our mind was what happened in 2014 with the invasion, not the full-scale invasion, the invasion over there. And we had been prepared together with the government of Israel, because there is a lot of Israelis also over there beside the Jews. And the idea was that everybody will come to Lviv, and that will be the humanitarian place, and from there are going to be flights outside. And just 2 weeks before, being together with the government of Israel, I felt bad, and I said, what happened in Lviv? It was so packed. Too many countries that want to get out. Maybe we should ask some of the countries to allow us to go through the border. And the government of Israel actually reached out to each and every one of the countries. And the only one that approved that was Poland.
Oh, wow.
The only one that approved later on, Lapid was the foreign affairs minister. So think about, never mind, it's a politics, what happened with him, but they've been the only one. And when you said about the Israeli flag, at the beginning they allowed Jews and Israeli to skip the line with the consulate of Israel that have been a meaningful role, and we need to raise that and say that Israel at that time did a great job, and doesn't have the place for the flag, so we put cars and the flags of Israel. So that's about it. But again and again, I think what people are looking to be part of something, to be part of a community. And with Chabad, they have their community. And with Chesed, they have their community. But you still have family that are not connected, and they are more connected to their families than outside of Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened with the Aliyah. So I think that when people come to this kind of fairs that we have around Aliyah, it's not necessarily about that tomorrow morning they will make Aliyah. It's about feeling part of a community, feeling part and connected to their families that outside of Ukraine. And that's why we see growing numbers over there. I hope that in the end of the war, we see a large scale of Aliyah. But I say even not, we know that either if people coming to Chesed, or either if people coming to Chabad, or people coming to the Jewish Agency event, we know that everyone feel that is welcome, and there is someone that is watching after him. And this is exactly what happened over there. And the infrastructure, again, as Ariel said, the infrastructure that have been in place for more than 30 years, and former Soviet Union help us to make it happen. Thank you.
So
I want to add one thing. I think the infrastructure that Chesed has and what we have is building the Aliyah. Because if we build a Jewish identity, what's going to happen, a lot of them are going to want to go to Israel. So it all interplays together in a very nice way.
Exactly. And Ariel, one of the things people, we heard Melinda and we've heard all of you talk about just how awful it is in Ukraine. But the reality is, if you're a Jew in Ukraine, you have it so much better than everybody else.
Right.
You really do. And if you need your medicine, if you need your socialization, if you need your food, you're able to get it because there's an infrastructure to help you. And that's the dollars that all of you have given. My question to you, Ariel, is I wasn't with you in Lvov, I was with Annie, but you've been to Lvov many times in the past 2 years. And the Chesed Center there is just incredible. And I think if you could, what would be helpful, I think, for this room from a socialization standpoint, if you could talk to us floor by floor as you go up the 4 floors and then you go down to the basement, if you could tell us how it's that building is operational, I think this group would really enjoy that.
Okay. So you're requiring me to differentiate the Lviv and the Kiev Chesed and remember what's on every floor. So I'm going to give you my best. So you'll trust me about what's on the floors.
You can choose the one in Moscow.
Yeah. In both cases, the basement floor is in fact the counseling center, and I just have to say, gosh, I'm getting my trips mixed up, but I think we were in Lviv together in the counseling center, as I mentioned before, on the bottom floor. And there was a mom who had 2 daughters. And again, the dads, when they're conscripted, just to reinforce what everyone else is saying, our understanding is you fight till you can't fight anymore. That's how long you're in the army. So you're a middle-aged guy, you've never fought, and you're leaving until you can't fight anymore. So this mom had 2 girls, a 12-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the dad was off at the war. And the older girl, the 12-year-old, was crying at random times. In school, she'd start crying in the middle of the day. At a play date, she'd start crying. Anyway, I won't tell you the whole story, but the mother had therapy for both children, and she said to us, "Thank you for letting me see my child smile again." So that's what happens on the ground floor. Come upstairs with me, and you'll hear the music in the building of Yiddish songs that you might know or think of from a grandmother, from childhood, from a klezmer concert. And please envision with me 10, they're mostly ladies, yes, older ladies, sitting with a younger pianist and singing those songs. So what is that? That's a place to go and something to do during the day. It's stimulating memories and warm feelings that people have about their past, connecting them to their Jewish culture, and by extension, children and grandchildren as well, and providing them with companionship. Now I'll ask you to come to the attic, the top floor, where when I was, again, which trip was it? It was before Purim. And you had recently internally displaced families. So, just the way people are internally displaced in Israel, evacuated, not in their homes, very much have this in Lviv because it's in the western part of the country. And so these were newly arrived families with children of all ages, and these people have seen terrible things. When you come to Lviv because your home has been destroyed or you're afraid it's going to be, you're not just kind of piling in the car, stocking up with food, games for the kids, nice mixtape on the, CD, whatever it is. You're driving through, you're seeing terrible things out the window. I won't say what they are. I mean, these kids have experienced terrible things. What do we see on the top floor? Making masks for Purim. People, coloring with the themes of the Megillah. Preparing Hamantashen and so forth. So whether it's those in acute need, elders receiving the kind of companionship that they need, or young people experiencing, families experiencing their Judaism. And then the rooms that we might not show you as much because they're not as interesting are the offices. The offices out of which thousands and thousands of people receive the home care, these angels who are the home care workers who are paid, and every dollar is looked after, and the computers that know where everyone is and who needs what hours of help and which home care worker has a cold today, so needs a replacement and all of that is run out of the Chesed building as well. These Chesed buildings are the beating heart of the, as everyone has mentioned, of the human service delivery infrastructure for people of all ages.
Amazing. And Ariel, the reason I wanted you to go through that is because, again, I'm a real estate developer. I'm not a social psychologist or anything, but I've learned a lot over the past 33 months of this challenge. And what I've learned is that if we're going to solve this problem of trauma and we're going to have the people heal from this trauma, they're going to need a sense of community in order to do that. So the final stage is having that sense of community. And when you go to these Chesed centers, that sense of community, you can see it floor after floor after floor. These people have that sense of community. And whether it's at Chabad or whether it's at a JCC or whether it's this sense of community, the dollars that you are investing in Ukraine are the results of going to be on the other side a healthy community. So I think it's time to open it up to questions, and I see someone really itching to ask a question.
My name is Tanya Arbit. I live in Milwaukee now, but I was born in Kiev. As a child and a teenager, I went to communist camp for many years, and just recently being back in Kiev, to my surprise, our bus, the mission bus, is driving, and we were told that we're driving to this wonderful, beautiful Jewish camp, and I recognized the road. And then I somewhat recognized the entrance to the camp, which is now vibrant Jewish camp. So I don't have questions. I just want to thank all of you for caring, thank the panel for telling us what it is now, and thank all of you for caring about Jewish community in Ukraine. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya. Other questions? Or comments are welcome too.
So I have a question. I'll take the mic, but thank you all for sharing. I think one of the things we often talk about is going from COVID to Ukraine to Israel, but we went from COVID to Ukraine and Israel. And so here we're in a room with people who want to learn more, who are obviously invested, who are following what's going on. The needs, some of them sound like core annual things that are happening anyway, and some of them sound like emergency response needs. How do we balance that dialogue in the field when we're talking to people who aren't necessarily in this room?
Can I just say, I'm sorry.
No, first. Beauty and lady, it's one of them.
Acharon Chaviv.
Okay.
The work that I described, the basic humanitarian work for tens of thousands of poor elderly that we provide, that's the core work. Federations fund that through your core dollars and through other allocations. And it's crucial, and again, it's the basis of being able to provide the rest of the response. But what we have in Ukraine is a continuing emergency level need. This situation is 33 months old, as you so rightly said. And on the one hand, we may rightly say that it doesn't feel like an emergency after all if it's been 33 months, but on the other hand, the needs are elevated to a continuing crisis level. But what we don't have, of course, is that feeling of crisis that stimulates the response. The only thing I can say is that everything that is being experienced in Israel, families separated, homes destroyed, people displaced internally, kids not going to school, mental health needs, it is all the same, and it's been 3 years, 3 grinding years. So I thank you for raising it, and I ask everyone in the room to remember it and to bring it back to your communities as well, that yes, unfortunately, there are 2 crises.
I think there's two added dimensions. First thing, Israel has an infrastructure which is helping the basic Israeli. Israel prices are not up by 200%. Even if there's shelling, there's defense against that shelling. There's a whole system there. The crisis is real. I'll give you another element about this crisis. Before the Ukraine war began, Jewish communities, the basic Jewish communities like the one I mentioned in Zaporozhye and others, they were doing very well. They were self-sustaining already. People would come to raise money for projects in Israel in cities like Zaporozhye. They were contributing to other Jewish communities around the world. Dnieper had given out $10, $20 million worth of money to other projects around the world. It was famous for, you can go to Dnieper to raise money, like you can go to New York or Melbourne or something like that. Now these communities are flipped in their total sense of crisis. And there's the basic sustenance, like food, like holiday packages. They are just, everything has turned around totally inside out, and there is not the infrastructure in Israel, both from the government. First thing, if you look at the per capita income of people in Ukraine, compare it to per capita income to Israel. Israel now, it's about $53,000 of GDP. I don't know what Ukraine, but it's much, much lower. And with all of that, now you have a total real sense of crisis. So part of it is Jewish community structure, and that became an independent, successful, that was the big success of Ukraine. People were standing on their own feet. Now they're totally dependent. And because of our focus, other places, which are equally or even more so important, there's a lot what needs to be done in Ukraine, and the help is desperate. And because we're so focused on Israel, which we need to be focused on Israel, we've got a real serious crisis going on. And it's getting only worse.
I would maybe just add, when we think about a crisis in Ukraine, we primarily think about inside Ukraine. And when we think about what's happening in Israel, we think about primarily within Israel's borders. But you have many, many displaced Ukrainians, and now we're starting to see, even in a small community like Krakow, dozens and hundreds of displaced Israelis. So when we think about supporting Israel and supporting Ukraine, we have to also understand, again, Jews, that these people have left the borders. No longer only means supporting them within their borders, and that there are communities, especially places in Europe, where people are finding refuge, and there aren't that many places, as we see a darkness, not to be too dramatic, a darkness kind of being cast over certainly Western Europe in terms of a Jewish perspective, that there are places of increased Jewish life, Germany, places like Poland, where both Ukrainian Jews and Israeli Jews are finding shelter and refuge, and we, as the international Jewish community, need to remember that and hopefully support that.
I want to reframe the challenge. I'm not sure that the challenge is about what is more important. The needs of the elderly, one that need the medicine or the identity, the needs are Israel or the needs are in Ukraine. There is a situation right now that there is a growing needs within our brother and sister all around the world. I truly believe that there are enough resources within the Jewish people to deal with this challenge. I think the question is, how can we bring the message out? How can people feel and understand they need to take part? And I think this should be our message. It's not about, okay, now it's an emergency, let's give money to that. We can't continue to work like that. The Jewish people now have three fronts: Israel, Russia and Ukraine, and actually also Western Europe and other countries. The rise of anti-Semitism over there, the situation, the Jews are afraid in some of the cases to identify as Jews. This is part of our challenge. But at the same time, it's a huge opportunity for us, because people want to connect and take part. And we should let them feel this kind of sense of agency that they can take part of rebuilding the Jewish community in Ukraine or other places that over there. So for me, that's what we need to be done.
And as you go back to your communities and you're looking for speakers and you're looking for ideas of how to engage people in your community, please reach out to these 4 organizations, because I can tell you that if these 4 people can't be in their community, they will get you somebody that will be in your community, that will hold a parlor meeting, that will talk to people that are interested in Ukraine. You can tell from JFNA, it's not just this panel that we're having today to talk about Ukraine. I'm going to be profiled tomorrow at the main plenary talking about Ukraine. Tomorrow afternoon, we have a lunch talking about Ukraine. So this is high on our priority list. And we are going to be, we have made a commitment to our partners to raise an additional $25 million towards the effort. They already know this. And so with that money is going to be through our traditional partners and our newer partners to make sure that they have the resources from JF&A on top of their already approved allocations from our annual campaign. So look, this is critically important that we keep this top of mind. So thank you for that question. Other questions?
So my question involves short-term logistics and then long-term logistics. The idea of another winter is terrifying, especially when I think about the elderly who perhaps can't travel as well as other people in the area. What are we doing? What is the plan? Specifically in regard to them and another winter, how do we turn that into something that honestly at this point we need to think about in a long-term perspective, that winter comes every year, we don't know when this conflict will be over. And then long-term logistics on top of that, what is the long-term plan for children, for young families? Is it to get as many people to Israel as possible, which at this point is kind of scary because you're sending them from one war zone to another? Is it to build infrastructure that can withstand the current situation, like you're talking about the generators and everything? But what do we think of as a community when we hear you talk about winter and preparedness and this year and next year and long-term helping these people, our people, live in this situation that they find themselves in?
I don't want to hog the
Take it out.
first
Both of you can
spot.
speak.
So I'll talk first about what it means to help people winter after winter after winter. There are certain kinds of aid that you can provide that last. And Rabbi Eliezri spoke about generators. We also provide individuals with something called electricity concentrators. So they plug into the wall, it stores up the electricity while there is some, and then you can still have tea or run your computer or whatever it might be. And that you really only need to give people once. It lasts them for several years. But food and fuel are consumable. And the fact is that in the immediate term, and I'm talking about in the next year or 2 years or 3 years, alleviating their suffering means providing that if they're cold and hungry. There's not much to say about that, but let's talk about the long term. JDC, and in fact all the organizations in different ways are involved in helping these communities develop. You know, as you've heard us, again, each say in different ways, these are parts of the world, this part of the world, it's Ukraine, but it's Russia as well, and surrounding countries also, where the communists denied Jews their Jewish identity basically for 2 generations. And aside from all the other things that suffer from that, communal institutions suffer as well. So they don't have the same kind of, think about all the wealth of Jewish community infrastructure that we have here. It's not the same there. It's not as much. And so some of the work that JDC does is in fact called community development. Leadership training for professionals, leadership training for lay people, helping develop the community institutions and Jewish life and Jewish knowledge so that a generation from now or sooner, and we need it to be even a little bit sooner than that, the communities will begin to have the wherewithal to provide for their own welfare, as you say, Rabbi Eliezri, as so many of them were able to do at different points in the past. So those are just a couple of thoughts about, recurring, I'm going to call it reducing suffering, which unfortunately that suffering doesn't go away right away, but then longer term solutions so that communities can be more self-sufficient.
I want to add one point. First thing is that many people, we have to face certain realities. What?
Last comment.
Yeah, people can't leave. They can't leave the country.
Oh, I thought you meant here.
No,
I thought you meant here. I was like, good strategy. Don't let him out.
No,
Last comment.
You can't
last
leave.
comment.
Last comment.
Okay,
You're-
okay. Lock the doors.
Rabbi says you can't leave.
Good job,
So
Rabbi.
that people cannot leave the country, and because their husbands are in the army and they're not going to go. So we have to try to help them. What Ariel says is very true. A lot of it is just giving them the emergency aid to get through. The second thing which she said is also very true, and we're doing the same thing, and JDC is doing it, is rebuilding community leadership from within. But ultimately, these people are going to make their own decisions if they want to stay, if they want to leave. What we have to do is help them get through this crisis. So then they're going to plot their. There's an old joke. What's a Zionist? A Jew in America who tells a Jew in Russia to move to Israel. They're going to plot their own course. Some will come back. Some will go to Israel. Hopefully Yehuda will bring a lot of them to Israel. We'll be very happy if that happens. But the fact of the matter is they're going to make their own decisions. We have to get them through this crisis. And then once it's through this crisis, that means giving them the basic needs, basic sustenance, food, warmth, the electricity, whatever it may be. And once they're through that crisis, they're going to plot their own course as a community.
Round of applause for our great panel.
Thank you. You too.
A thank you to Melinda for setting the framework. And thank you to all of you for showing up to this session, for being passionate about this issue. Please, please, please take this back to your home communities and share the story. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yehuda?